The sound wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the crowd. A sudden strike. A gasp. And Zara Mitchell staggered sideways, her shoulder clipping a polished display as her hand flew to her face. For a moment, the upscale plaza froze. Phone stopped scrolling. Footsteps stalled mid-stride. Even the music overhead seemed to thin out. Cole Warren stood over her, jaw tight, chest lifted, not panicked, not ashamed. Certain that this woman was still who she used to be. "Don't look at me like that," he snapped, loud enough for people to hear. "You've always known your place." Zara didn't shout. She didn't run. She didn't defend herself. She just stood there, breathing carefully, as if she'd learned long ago that stillness was safer than resistance. Cole mistook that silence for victory. What he didn't see was the thin band of platinum hidden beneath the cuff of her sleeve. What he didn't notice was the subtle shift in the air, the way strangers stopped watching her and started watching him. What he didn't understand was that the woman in front of him hadn't been alone for a very long time. And he had no idea who now answered to her name. He didn't recognize the men who had quietly repositioned near the exits. Didn't sense the attention turning sharp, alert, deliberate. Didn't realize that somewhere nearby, a man who never raised his voice had just been informed that someone had crossed a line that didn't forgive mistakes. Cole Warren thought he'd slapped his ex-wife. In reality, he had touched something protected. And before this moment was over, everything he believed made him powerful was about to disappear. The sound landed before the pain did. A sharp, unmistakable crack that sliced through the soft music and low conversation like a blade on glass. Heads turned in unison. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence. Zara Mitchell's vision tilted as her cheek burned, the sting blooming fast and hot beneath her skin. She staggered half a step, catching herself against the edge of a marble counter polished to a mirror shine. The contrast was obscene, her trembling fingers reflected back at her in flawless stone, the faint red mark rising on her face where his hand had been. For a suspended second, no one moved. The space around them was immaculate. Cream floors without a single scuff. Gold-trimmed fixtures glowing under warm lights. The kind of place where people spoke softly, where money moved quietly, where scenes like this weren't supposed to happen. Cole Warren stood too close, his hand still half raised as if his body hadn't caught up to what he'd done. His jaw was tight, his eyes bright with something ugly and familiar, rage sharpened by certainty. He didn't look afraid. He looked justified. "Don't ever ignore me," he said, voice loud enough to carry, controlled enough to sound rehearsed. "You think you can just walk past me now?" A ripple went through the onlookers.
Shock. Curiosity.
The instinctive discomfort of people realizing they were witnesses to something intimate and wrong. Zara straightened slowly. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her shoulders back, forced her breath to even out. Years ago, she had learned that panic only fed him. Silence starved him. "I wasn't talking to you," she said quietly. That, more than anything, seemed to snap something in him. Cole laughed, short, sharp, performative. "Still pretending you're above it," he said, gesturing around them. "Look where you are. Look at yourself. You really think you belong here?" His eyes swept over her like a verdict. The simple dress. The lack of logos. The absence of anything that screamed importance. Zara felt the heat crawl up her neck, the old reflex urging her to shrink, to apologize, to disappear. She swallowed it down. Her fingers curled slightly at her side, brushing the fabric at her wrist where cool metal rested against her skin. Around them, people watched without intervening. Some with sympathy, some with judgment, some already angling their phones, hungry for a moment that didn't belong to them. Cole leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to make it intimate again. Dangerous again. "You don't get to rewrite the past," he said. "You don't get to pretend you're someone new." Zara met his eyes then. Really looked at him. And for the first time since the sound of the slap echoed through the polished space, something shifted. Not in the room, but in her. "I'm not pretending," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Behind Cole, the air seemed to tighten, subtle and unseen. A hush settling deeper than shock, deeper than curiosity. Cole didn't notice. He was still standing in the moment he thought he controlled, unaware that it had already slipped out of his hands. Cole's voice faded into background noise, but his presence dragged her backward in time all the same. There had been a version of Zara who would have folded under that look. A version who measured her words carefully, who learned the rhythm of his moods the way sailors learn tides, what to say, when to stay quiet, when to disappear entirely. That Zara had believed love meant endurance. That control, when dressed up as concern, was something to be grateful for. Cole had been charming once. Loud, confident, the kind of man who filled rooms and decided for everyone else what mattered. He had spoken for her before she learned how to interrupt, corrected her memories, rewrote arguments until she was apologizing for things she couldn't remember doing. By the time she noticed the pattern, she was already bending to it. Isolation had come quietly. A comment here, a joke there. Friends who didn't really get her. Opportunities that were too risky. He'd framed it all as protection. She'd mistaken the cage for shelter. The night she left, she hadn't been brave. She'd been empty. She remembered the sound of the door closing behind her, the weight of her bag cutting into her shoulder, the strange calm that came when there was nothing left to lose. No dramatic confrontation. No victory speech. Just survival narrowing down to its most basic instruction. Keep moving. For a long time after, she lived small on purpose. She learned how to exist without drawing attention, how to take up less space, how to rebuild quietly without announcing progress that could be taken away. Even when her life changed, when safety returned, when stability followed, those instincts stayed. Especially those. That was the woman Cole thought he was looking at now. The woman who flinched. The woman who waited. The woman who needed permission to stand upright. He didn't see the nights Zara had spent relearning her own thoughts. The therapy sessions where she untangled his voice from her own. The discipline it took to choose calm over fear, silence over reaction, not because she was weak, but because she refused to give him control again. Standing there, cheeks still warm, Zara realized something with startling clarity. Cole wasn't angry because she'd ignored him. He was angry because she no longer belonged to his story. Her stillness wasn't submission. It was restraint. And restraint, she had learned, was power practiced quietly. She lifted her gaze, not defiant, not pleading, just present. Cole mistook that calm for hesitation. He always had. What he never understood was this. The woman he once controlled had survived him. And the woman standing in front of him now had built a life where his voice no longer echoed loudest. He thought he owned her past. He had no claim on her future. And as the space around them grew heavier, charged with something he couldn't name, Zara felt it, the final loosening of a grip that had existed only in memory. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The woman he thought he owned was already gone. There was a life Zara never spoke about. Not because it was secret exactly, but because it was sacred. It had begun quietly the way real safety often does. No grand announcement. No sweeping declarations. Just a man who listened without interrupting. A presence that didn't demand explanation. A silence that felt like room to breathe instead of something to fill. Choi Sung-hoon had entered her world without trying to own it. She remembered the first time she realized she felt safe, not the fragile kind that depended on rules or routines, but the solid kind that existed even when things went wrong. It startled her more than fear ever had. She hadn't known what to do with it at first. He never asked her to be smaller. That alone had taken months to believe. Their marriage hadn't been a spectacle. No headlines. No photographs meant for strangers. Just a promise spoken softly, and meant absolutely. She had chosen the privacy deliberately. Visibility still felt dangerous. Power, even borrowed power, felt like something that could be taken away if noticed too soon. So she hid it. The ring stayed beneath sleeves. His name stayed unspoken in public. The protection moved at a distance, respectful enough to feel like freedom. When she walked alone, it wasn't because she was unguarded, it was because she was trusted. Choi understood restraint. He understood that the strongest shield was one the world didn't know it was testing. He never corrected people who underestimated her. Never stepped forward to announce himself.
He watched.
He waited. He let the illusions stand because illusions had a way of drawing out the truth in people, especially men like Cole. Zara had learned to live between two truths, the woman she had been and the life she now carried quietly with her. She wasn't hiding out of shame. She was hiding because healing had taught her patience. Because power, she'd learned, didn't need witnesses to exist. Standing in the polished space now, heart steady despite the eyes on her, she felt the weight of that hidden life like a steady pulse. She was not alone. She never had been, not for a long time. Around her, things were shifting in ways too subtle for Cole to register. The kind of movements that happened before storms, before doors closed, before consequences took shape. Zara stayed still. Restraint had been her survival once. Now it was her choice. She didn't reach for the ring, didn't glance toward the exits, didn't search the room for reassurance. She trusted what she had built. And somewhere nearby, a man who never rushed and never warned had already been told everything he needed to know. Zara lifted her chin just slightly. The life she hid had been forged in silence. And silence, she knew now, was not emptiness. It was pressure, waiting to be released. Cole was still talking. He always was. Words spilled from him with the same confidence they always had, sharp, dismissive, certain they would land exactly where he intended. He paced a half step, occupying space like it belonged to him by default, shoulders squared, chin lifted. The posture of a man who had never learned the difference between attention and respect. "Don't stand there like that," he said, irritation bleeding through the polish. "You think this little act makes you look strong?" He laughed again, louder this time, as if volume could tilt the room back in his favor. As if the people watching weren't already uncomfortable. As if the silence pressing in wasn't judgment. Cole had always believed the world worked the way he did. Loud enough wins, confident enough owns the narrative. Consequences were for other people. Rules bent for men who spoke with enough certainty. He had mistaken momentum for immunity his entire life. He looked at Zara and saw a role he expected her to play. The quiet one. The grateful one. The woman who owed him something for having once been chosen. "You were nothing before me," he said, casual and cruel, the way truth sounded when it had been rehearsed too many times. "And look at you now. Still playing dress-up. Still pretending." He didn't see how her calm unsettled the people around them. Didn't notice the way eyes flicked from his face to the mark on her cheek, then away again. He mistook discomfort for agreement. Entitlement had always been his blind spot. He believed history gave him rights. That time spent meant ownership. That having once been loved gave him permanent access. The idea that Zara's life had continued without him, improved without him, never quite fit into his worldview. So he talked over it. "I don't know who you think you're fooling," he continued, leaning closer, voice dropping into something he probably thought sounded controlled. "But I know you. I know how this ends." That was the problem. Cole only knew the version of the story where he stayed at the center. He didn't register the way the air around them felt heavier now, charged with an attention that wasn't his. Didn't sense that his performance had gone on too long. That people were no longer watching out of curiosity, but out of instinct. He smiled, tight, smug, familiar. "You should thank me," he added. "I made you." Zara didn't react. And that, more than any confrontation, was what finally threw him. His smile faltered just enough to show the crack beneath. He straightened, recalibrating, reaching for the authority that had always come easily before. He had never learned to change because the world had always let him stay the same. Cole Warren was still the man who believed power was taken by force and kept by volume. He had no idea he was standing in the last moment where that belief held. And he didn't realize that the room had already stopped being his stage. The space between them stretched thin, taut as a wire pulled too tight. No one spoke. Cole seemed to sense it before he understood it. The way sound drained from the room, the way movement slowed, deliberate and unnatural. His last words hung in the air, unsupported, waiting for a reaction that didn't come. Zara stood where she was. Her breathing had settled into something steady, controlled. The sting on her cheek pulsed, but she didn't touch it. Pain, she had learned, passed faster when you didn't negotiate with it. Around them, the polished space had transformed. What had been a public setting now felt sealed, contained, as though the walls themselves were listening. A couple near the entrance shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat and then thought better of it. Phones lowered, not out of kindness, but instinct. Cole frowned. "Say something," he muttered, irritation creeping back in. "You always do." Zara didn't. She felt it then, the change she'd learned to recognize without looking for it. The subtle realignment of energy. The sensation of being observed by something calm, precise, and very awake. She didn't turn her head, didn't search the room. She trusted what was already moving. Cole took a step back, then stopped, unsettled by his own hesitation. He rolled his shoulders, forcing a laugh that landed wrong, brittle at the edges. "This is getting ridiculous," he said. "You're making a scene?" But the scene had moved past him. The silence wasn't empty. It was layered, intentional, the kind that settled just before a door closed or a decision finalized. Zara felt it press against her spine, not as fear, but as certainty. Somewhere behind Cole, a man adjusted his stance. Somewhere else, a path quietly cleared. These were not gestures meant to be noticed. They were habits, systems engaging. Cole glanced around now, finally aware that something was off. His gaze snagged on faces that wouldn't quite meet his. On exits that no longer felt open in the way they had moments ago. "What?" he snapped. "What are you all looking at?" No one answered. Zara lifted her eyes, not to him, but to the space beyond, where the room seemed to narrow into focus. She didn't smile. She didn't brace herself. She simply waited. That, more than anything, deepened the tension. Cole mistook the stillness for indecision. He stepped forward again, reclaiming ground he thought he'd lost. "I'm done with this," he said. "I've got places to be." He turned slightly, as if preparing to leave, and stopped. Because the air had changed again, sharper now. Colder. As if the moment had drawn a line it would not let him cross without consequence. Zara didn't move. She didn't need to. The reckoning hadn't arrived yet. But it was close enough now that even Cole could feel it breathing. He didn't announce himself. There was no raised voice, no sudden commotion, no dramatic turn of heads at first. Just a subtle shift, like the room had exhaled and then forgotten how to breathe back in. Zara felt it before she saw him. The weight of attention moved, precise and unhurried, settling into place behind Cole. The kind of presence that didn't push its way forward because it didn't need to. The kind that assumed space would be made. Cole sensed it a second later. He turned, irritation already forming, ready to snap at whoever had wandered too close. The words stalled in his throat. The man standing there looked ordinary at first glance. Tailored dark coat. Calm posture. Hands relaxed at his sides. Nothing about him screamed for attention. And yet, the longer Cole looked, the more something tightened in his chest. Choi Sung-hoon met his gaze, without expression. His eyes were steady, unreadable, not cold, not angry. Focused. As if Cole were not a threat, not an obstacle, but a problem already being solved. No one spoke. Around them, the space adjusted. People stepped back without being asked. Conversations that had already died stayed buried. Even Cole's breathing sounded too loud now, intrusive. Choi's attention shifted. It moved past Cole, as if he were furniture, landing on Zara with quiet certainty. His gaze dropped to her cheek, just long enough to register the mark blooming there. Something tightened, barely perceptible, at the corner of his jaw. He crossed the remaining distance at an unhurried pace. Every step was measured. No rush. No hesitation. The kind of confidence that came from never needing to prove it. Zara finally turned fully toward him. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the noise inside her, the echo of Cole's voice, the old reflexes, the lingering tension, fell away. Choi didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His presence answered the question before it was spoken. Behind him, Cole found his voice again, thin and sharp with forced authority. "Hey," he said. "This doesn't concern you." Choi didn't look at him. That omission landed harder than any insult. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, even, and carried effortlessly through the silence. "Step back." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't loud. It was an instruction. Cole laughed once, a reflex more than a choice. "You don't get to tell me what to." Choi turned his head just enough to acknowledge him. The look wasn't violent. It was final. Cole stopped talking. Choi's focus returned to Zara. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. "I'm here," he said. Nothing more. Nothing less. And in the stillness that followed, it became unmistakably clear to everyone watching. The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. The reckoning had arrived. Cole didn't understand what was happening at first. That was the most disorienting part. Not fear, not anger, but confusion. The kind that crept in when the world stopped responding the way it always had. He straightened, drawing on habit. "This is getting out of hand," he said, louder now, aiming for authority. "I don't know who you think you are, but—" Choi Sung-hoon lifted a hand.
Not sharply.
Not dramatically. Just enough. Cole's voice died mid-sentence. Behind him, movement unfolded with quiet efficiency. A man stepped into place near the entrance. Another shifted slightly to the side, blocking a clear path without making it obvious. There was no rush, no force, only inevitability. Cole turned, irritation flickering into something closer to unease. "What is this?" he demanded. "You can't just—" His phone vibrated. Once. He ignored it, still searching faces for reassurance. None came. It vibrated again. Then again. Short, frantic pulses against his palm as he finally dragged it from his pocket. His brow furrowed as he read the screen. What the hell? The color drained from his face. Zara watched in silence as the first crack spread. She didn't feel satisfaction. Just distance. As if she were observing a storm from behind glass. Cole swiped, breath quickening. "That's a mistake," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "There's been a mistake." He tried to make a call. The screen went dark. A faint sound escaped him, something between a laugh and a choke. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no." One of the men behind Choi spoke quietly into an earpiece. Another checked a tablet, nodded once, and put it away. Cole's confidence collapsed in stages. First his posture, shoulders sagging, stance no longer aggressive but unbalanced. Then his voice, which rose and cracked as he tried to fill the silence again. "You think this scares me?" he snapped, the lie obvious even to himself. "I have connections. I have people." Choi finally looked at him. "Had," he corrected calmly. That single word did more damage than any explanation. Cole looked around wildly now, eyes darting, searching for exits that no longer felt like exits. For witnesses who might intervene. For the version of the world where noise still worked. None appeared. Another vibration, this time from a watch on his wrist. He stared at it, frozen, as notification after notification stacked up. Accounts restricted. Meetings canceled. Messages unread, and then erased. Each one peeled something away. Zara felt it then, not triumph, not relief, but release. The last thread tying her to his version of reality, snapping cleanly.
Cole took a step back.
Then another. "What did you do?" he whispered. Choi didn't answer. He didn't need to. Cole Warren was still standing there, still breathing, still visible. But the man who believed himself powerful had already been erased. And everyone in the room knew it. The space they moved into felt separate from the world they'd left behind, as if a door had closed on noise, light, and expectation all at once. Zara didn't remember walking. Only the steady rhythm of steps beside her, the quiet certainty of being guided without being pulled. The tension that had held her upright for so long began to loosen in small, unfamiliar ways, first in her shoulders, then in her hands, then finally in her breath. Inside the car, the door sealed with a muted sound that felt final. Silence followed, but it was different now.
Soft. Contained.
Protective. For a moment, Zara sat very still, staring at nothing. The adrenaline drained too quickly, leaving behind a hollow ache that spread from her chest outward. Her hands trembled, just slightly, as if her body was finally asking permission to feel. Choi sat beside her, close enough to anchor her, far enough to give her space. He didn't speak right away. He knew better than to rush what had been held back for years. The first tear surprised her. It slid down her cheek without warning, warm against skin that was still tender. She lifted a hand to wipe it away, embarrassed by the instinct even now, but it was too late. Another followed. Then another. Her breath hitched. She folded forward, the composure she had worn like armor finally slipping loose. The sound that escaped her wasn't loud, it was small, fractured, the kind that came from deep places that had never been allowed air. Choi moved then. Not abruptly. Not possessively. He wrapped an arm around her, solid and warm, drawing her gently into the space beside him. Zara leaned into it without resistance, her forehead resting against his shoulder as the last of her restraint broke apart. "I was fine," she whispered, the words brittle and untrue. "I thought I was past it." Choi's hand settled at her back, steady, grounding. "You were strong," he said quietly. "That isn't the same thing." The distinction undid her. She cried then, not the sharp, panicked sobs of fear, but the deep, shaking release of someone who no longer needed to stay guarded. Years of swallowed words and managed reactions poured out in silence. He didn't try to fix it. He stayed. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds. Time softened, stretched, became irrelevant. Eventually, Zara's breathing slowed. The trembling eased. The ache settled into something quieter. She pulled back slightly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Her cheek still throbbed, but it felt distant now, less like a wound, more like a reminder. Choi tilted his head, eyes searching her face. "Are you here?" he asked gently. She nodded. For the first time since she'd seen Cole again, the fear was gone. Not buried, not managed, but released. Zara leaned back into the seat, exhaustion heavy but clean. Sanctuary, she realized, wasn't a place. It was the moment your body finally believed you were safe. The first time Zara stepped into the light, she felt the instinct to pull back rise automatically. Old habits didn't vanish just because fear had loosened its grip. They lingered at the edges, quiet reminders of who she had once needed to be. But this time, she didn't obey them. The room they entered was filled with motion, people, voices, attention, but it no longer pressed in on her. She moved beside Choi without shrinking, her pace unhurried, her posture open. There was no announcement, no demand for recognition. Still, eyes turned. Not because she was loud. Because she was present. She felt the difference immediately. The way space adjusted around her. The way conversations softened instead of colliding. It wasn't intimidation she sensed, it was acknowledgement. For years, Zara had learned how to exist unnoticed. How to pass through rooms like a shadow, careful not to invite questions or curiosity. She had mistaken invisibility for safety. Now she understood the cost. Choi slowed slightly, just enough to let her choose. Not to guide. Not to lead. Simply to make room. Zara took the half step forward on her own. The movement was small, almost imperceptible. But inside her, something settled into place with finality. She wasn't stepping out of hiding to prove anything. She wasn't reclaiming space out of anger or defiance. She was standing because she belonged there. Her hand lifted to her wrist, fingers brushing the cuff she had always kept pulled low. She rolled it back, not dramatically, not for effect. The simple band of platinum caught the light briefly before resting where it always had.
Visible now.
She felt no rush of triumph, no surge of power, only calm, the kind that came from alignment, from no longer splitting herself into parts to survive different rooms. Someone nearby noticed. Then someone else. A ripple of recognition passed quietly, without spectacle. Names were not spoken. They didn't need to be. Zara met their gazes evenly, offering nothing but the truth of her presence. She didn't smile to soften it, didn't harden herself to protect it. She just stood. For the first time, she felt how light it was to carry nothing hidden. Choi watched her, something like pride flickering briefly across his expression. Not ownership, not triumph. Recognition. Respect. He didn't step ahead of her. He didn't claim the moment. It was hers. Zara inhaled, steady and deep. She was no longer the woman who waited for permission to exist. No longer the one who measured herself against the past. The mark on her cheek would fade. The memory would settle. But this choice to be seen would remain. She moved forward again, fully now, her steps sure. No longer hidden. No longer small. And as the world adjusted to her presence, Zara Mitchell finally understood something simple and irreversible. Visibility wasn't danger. It was freedom.